It's time at last. Oxford United, 1982 to 88. The milkman that delivered.
No, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which fans attempt the seemingly impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, for once actually inserting Oxford United facts and making the case for Oxford United where it belongs. And joining me as ever, and poor Jamie, it is our king of the data, Jamie Rooney.
Yeah, I probably need to make an effort to make Manchester United references, but I don't think there's going to be a problem for me in this particular one. I think there's a few that you may want to profile. You know, Greg, we've done Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic. We did England, 82, England, 96. We've done West Germany, 54, and Germany, 1996. In the 98 teams that we've been ranking so far, we've done 3 teams twice. We haven't done a club team twice, but we are, for some strange reason, doing Oxford United again. When we put this one to bed, blinkered greats. Everyone agreed. It was conclusive. Why are we here, Graham?
Yeah. Well, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Absolute kangaroo court, that session, and very clearly wrong. And in order to remedy this, I have brought along an ally. So this is a fantastic story, and we're absolutely delighted somebody who knows the story quite well because he's just written the book on it. So I'm also delighted we've got joining us Scott Walkinshaw, a.k.a. Oxblogger to very many people. Welcome aboard, Scott.
Well, thank you for having me on. I mean, this could be quite a short episode because this is by far the greatest team the world has ever seen. I mean, it's unequivocal, isn't it? You know, we can move straight to the end. Let's go.
I think so, and I've got a feeling that Jamie's comments might be edited quite heavily out of this podcast. So I should give the book a mini plug as we speak. So The Glory Years, which came out in January, February time, and
end of January, yeah, 2 months.
And what sort of set you on this path?
I guess I'm getting older, and I realise that there's a lot of Oxford United fans that even Oxford United fans who don't know the story of the greatest period in the club's history. I mean, I'm old enough to have lived through it. It was, a great time. And I think people know bits of the Oxford United story during the 80s. They know about the Thames Valley Royals and the merger. They know about the Milk Cup final. They vaguely know we played in the top flight, but they don't know how it all knitted together. And that's what I wanted to knit it together, because although perhaps over-featured in this particular podcast, but in a literary sense, we're underserved. Although ironically, we actually now have 2 books out about Oxford United this year. So, in fact, within a week of each other.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to tell that story in as much detail as I could sort of muster within the word count I was allowed. I almost, because of my nerdy self, it was almost trying to get a kind of day-by-day account of what happened. Because it's a lot. These stories get lost, and this is true across all of football.
And I think one of the things that really clearly comes out of this, and we'll probably talk about one or two of these bits, is that this is a club that is really not ready for the run it has. This is a club that is absolutely trying to come to terms with where it goes, and this comes across really well in the book, I think. And you have quite a lot of detail about the agonies of the ticketing. Anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even simple things. We were selling 30,000 tickets for Wembley through a single window at the ticket office at the Manor because it's a Southern League ground. It's not even a Division 4 ground. It's a Southern League ground, and which has kind of evolved over time. Anybody who knows the Manor will know that it had kind of 6 stands to it, and it was built over a period of sort of development of the club, and then suddenly in the 80s it went boom, and the club took off, and almost you've got the environment itself the manor, which I'm sure we may talk about. But you've also got the kind of social environment, the environment that football was in at the same time, which was just in a state of collapse, actually. And younger listeners won't be able to picture it, I don't think, just what a mess football was in. And that was actually a bit of the story that, as you write these things, they kind of tell a story back to you. And what you start to realise is that we were right at the kind of B of the bang of the Premier League. Yeah. This was the end of the Football League. It was the end of an empire, which was then replaced subsequently by the Premier League. So that in itself is quite an interesting story that kind of emerges from it. And that wasn't my intention to tell that story.
It is quite interesting as well. The other element, and again, this sort of comes across as, this is the kind of the bad old 80s of football hooliganism, which is kind of underpins everything right down to Oxford obviously being cruelly robbed of the chance of getting into Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things I wanted to try and capture, was that a lot of these things are romanticised, and that everybody was happy all of the time and everything went perfectly well, and we were sort of immune to all of these problems. And we absolutely weren't immune to all of these problems. There were riots at the manor, there was trouble, there was people being knocked out by coins being thrown from the stands, on top of all the other things that were going on, like the rumoured Super League, like TV blackouts, it was just a proper mess. And in some ways, that kind of made it an even more interesting story. If it was a similar story in the Premier League years, it would be too clean and shiny, I think. It's quite nice that it's got this kind of grittiness to it.
Yes, it's definitely rough edges. The 1980s, we've referenced it a few times, is for English football, it's rock bottom. And you see that with attendances across the whole of the Football League. Attendances are just dropping down for pretty much most football teams. Even the big hitters are seeing their lowest attendances as they go through to the mid-1980s. So it is a fascinating period. It's a period I think Graham and I spend a lot of time on doing these podcasts. There's so many teams that we've covered, but I think that's what makes it super interesting. But I do agree, Scott, it is kind of gritty, it is kind of rough. It's certainly not the razzmatazz you see in the Premier League these days, where football is so polished.
Yeah, but ironically, and again, this is another thing you start to sort of, I've picked up out of it, because I take no credit for half of these stories. They kind of emerged as I was writing, is that Robert Maxwell, of all the people, was trying to do what Rupert Murdoch eventually did. He wanted subscription TV. He wanted it to be an entertainment family sport. He tried to do it by acquiring football clubs, of which Oxford was the first, and then Derby, and then there was many others. But that was his strategy, was that he was going to try and... He essentially tried to own football. Yeah. Murdoch eventually did it. Essentially, that and of course, Murdoch and Maxwell were massive rivals. They absolutely hated each other, and Murdoch outmaneuvered Maxwell at every step. From buying the News of the World back in whenever that was, in the 60s or 70s, to now Murdoch sitting on a multi-billion-pound sport and basically getting all the benefit from it. And Maxwell, as I say, has an incredible character himself, but also outmaneuvered by other people all the time. It was just quite, in some ways, it's quite funny. It's sort of Trumpian almost.
Yes.
There was so much bluster. Yeah. So much bluster. And yet he got sidestepped on multiple occasions. Things like the merger, for example. It just got caught out. He would have got away with it if it wasn't for those darn kids at Reading, You're
absolutely right. I was thinking about it this afternoon and made that same... Because when I was thinking about Maxwell, who's obviously absolutely central to this story, there is a Trumpian element of him, that he is just a deal maker. That is how he'll go about things. That's his sort of approach. And obviously, he's somebody who is used to getting his way, which is something he largely spectacularly fails to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I tried to sort of portray Maxwell not quite, because we now know a lot about what he was up to. And there's no doubt he was notorious at the time, but he was a bit of if you look at kind of newspaper cuttings from around that time, it was just a bit of a comedy character than he was evil and nasty. Although he was clearly an unpleasant person, but he was Trumpian. He was admired in the same, there were people who hated him and couldn't stand him. And then there were people who just completely admired him. In a sense, he was kind of right for that time because particularly during the 80s, the early 80s, you know, the country's on its knees. You needed entrepreneurs who were going to break the rules and change things. And Maxwell, that's what Maxwell tried to do. I mean, not for any kind of social benefit, for his own, for his, you know, to make as much money as possible. But you know, that's why he was admired, because he was, you know, he was kind of part of that almost, you know, that sort of yuppie spirit, I suppose. You know, they're kind of like the Norman Tebbit, get on your bike and make things happen, and that's what Maxwell did, but on a massive scale. And then we get swept up in all of it, you know, in 1982.
Yeah, and at the point he comes in, Oxford are in, unusually for Oxford, in some position of financial peril, aren't they? And he is the White Knight, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So the club were looking for an Elton John. That's what they keep talking around the time, that they wanted an Elton John, because Elton John had taken over at Watford and taken them up through the divisions. I don't think they were at the first division by the time we took over. They were certainly on their way. And we had our Elton John living next door. You know, so you've got the Manor, which is on the London Road in Headington, on the outskirts of Oxford, and right next door is Headington Hill Hall, which is now part of Brookes University, and that was where Maxwell lived. So he lived next door to the Manor. Didn't really know anything about the club, but he lived right next door, and that's, you know, we were looking for our Elton John, and there he was.
Yeah, more Kiki D than Elton John. Don't I? That doesn't even work, but I like the reference anyway. That he knows not a great deal about football is pretty evident very early on with the Thames Valley Royals, and kind of an extraordinary, just an extraordinary thing to attempt.
Well, it is. And yes, I mean, his ignorance of football is profound, because it's not just, I don't know who Oxford are. He just doesn't understand football as a kind of cultural phenomenon, as a thing that people may care about. So he just applies this kind of business thing of, here's an asset called Oxford, which has got the Manor Ground, which we could sell. Over here, we've got Reading, which is also bankrupt, and they've got Elm Park, which was their stadium. We could sell that as well. And then we could just mash the two together and stick them in Didcot, which is a town somewhere in between the two. And everybody would just kind of, you know, they'd get over themselves eventually. You know, it's like I don't know, it's like Sainsbury's and Tesco's merging. You wouldn't be that bothered about it, would you? You'd still go to the supermarket as long as the prices were all right. I think that was the logic, was that, well, you know, their customers, they might be a bit grumpy because they can't get the Parmesan cheese they used to be able to get. Sorry, that's the supermarket analogy, stretched too far. But there'll be a grumpiness because it would be inconvenient for lots of reasons. But everybody would get on with it because in the end they just want to go to a game of football. They don't care who's playing or anything like that, which was absolutely mad, you know, because literally everybody said it was a bad idea. You know, like, you know, the managers, the players. Well, ironically, the FA didn't. That's the weird thing. The FA went, oh, that's interesting. Because they saw the financial collapse of football, and they went, well, it's worth a shot because we've run out of other ideas, you know?
Yeah.
Somehow, I mean, it takes something, doesn't it, to be that confident in your conviction. I'm not going to, this is my last mention of him, but it is Trumpian, you know, it is very, very much, there's something very interesting psychologically going on with him because he just didn't see a problem with it. And
you've already referenced it, Scott. His ignorance is incredible, but he gets so close to achieving that goal. It's the 11th hour stuff, saved by, as you referenced, those pesky kids at Reading that kind of found a few legal loopholes that they were able to stop it from happening. But Maxwell, I think it's like within hours of merging the two football teams.
Yeah. I mean, it was thwarted because essentially the chairman of Reading at the time was selling shares he didn't own to Maxwell. And Maxwell was accumulating a stake in the club, so he got up to about 20%, 20%. And then the idea was that he would, you know, aggressive takeover, he would acquire enough to be able to take over the club completely. And that would have been it, because Oxford we'd bent the knee at that point as a club. You know, the board is full of Maxwell family members, if nothing else, and so Oxford had bowed down straight away. I mean, the fans hadn't. There was a huge protest. There was lots of resistance, but actually that didn't matter to Maxwell. So Reading were very close to deliver. Well, we had already delivered on our side of the bargain, and Reading were getting very close until Roger Smee, who was a former Reading player and had previously taken an interest in taking over the club, started going through the books. Basically at Reading, and they went, hang on a minute, you're selling shares you don't own. So essentially every AGM that they'd had for, I don't know, 10 years or something was completely null and void. And it all had to go back to square one, at which point the season was running out. There was a lot of kind of things then started to play against Maxwell. But yeah, it wasn't Oxford fans, and it wasn't the Oxford board. We absolutely caved. I would love to have told the story to it was just this sort of, the fans just galvanised together and just, David and Goliath stuff. And it just isn't true. It just isn't true at all.
Deep down, I think it's probably a series of Oxford fans there saying, "Oh, Kerry Dixon, he would be quite useful up front."
Well, essentially, that was kind of on the pitch. That was kind of the idea was that Jim Smith would take over. And that they would merge the two teams. And there was a league game between Oxford and Reading at the Manor, which was the day before the sort of High Court final judgment of the whole thing. And Maxwell positioned it as basically a trial for next season's squad. So all these players kind of like, and of course the Reading players, Reading were on the verge of going down. Well, actually they did go down eventually. So they were on the verge of going down. And so all the Reading players were just, they were about to be made redundant. And Kerry Dixon was the one player that was the one that they thought might actually make it into this new team. But everyone else was going to be an Oxford team.
Yeah, I think Jim Smith was happy that he was still going to be gainfully employed as well.
Well, yeah, he had a lot of. If you look at in his autobiography, he doesn't really go into a lot of detail about it, but he talks about just needing money.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what his situation was, but he needed money, and he just took the practical option, which was he kind of kept his head down and was just pleased to still have a job.
Yeah.
Maurice Evans, the Reading manager at the time, and of course became Oxford manager, was indignant about it. And Maurice Evans is just the anger. There's an interview with him the day after, and he is so angry about it because he was genuinely a proper football man and he had very, very high principles. He'd been at Reading for years. He was very much a Reading fan, and he was just incandescent about what had happened. But yeah, Jim Smith just went, "I've got a job. I'm all right." Yeah, you can't blame him,
Jim Smith, he's obviously. I mean, that's one of the other great things about the story is kind of there are lots of narrative loops and connections that will come back, not least with Smith and Evans. But Jim Smith coming in at the time actually was quite a statement appointment, wasn't it? Because he was at Birmingham beforehand, 2 leagues above. So it's actually quite big for Oxford at the time.
Oh, huge. Yeah. So he was manager of Birmingham, who were a first division club at the time. I mean, they were sort of lower mid-table. They were they were on quite a bad run at the time, and so were starting to drift towards the bottom of the table. But there was no reason to think that they wouldn't stay up. But then something else happened, which was that down the road at Aston Villa, Ron Saunders, who at the time Aston Villa were the champions of England, and Ron Saunders fell out with their owner and resigned. Birmingham's owner at the time thought, I could stick one up the local rivals by recruiting Ron Saunders, and fired Jim Smith in order to make space for Ron Saunders to come in. And yeah, so Jim Smith was out of a job and presumably needed money. And that's where Maxwell sort of steps in via Ron Atkinson, and who at the time was Manchester United manager, but previously at Oxford had lots of strong Oxford connections, sort of brokered this conversation between Maxwell and Jim Smith. And that changed everything. But you're right, ambition. I often found myself sort of kind of transpose this story into modern day, and you think of a Premier League manager dropping down to manage, I don't know, Rotherham, Eddie Howe dropping down to manage Rotherham. It was that kind of thing, and you have to be pretty ambitious to even want to attempt that recruitment, I would imagine.
So once we got the merger nonsense out of the way, the business end of it starts to happen in that 83-84 season. So Oxford in the third tier at this stage, and actually the league form it takes a little while to fully crystallise. But this is where the first kind of adventures in what's gloriously known as the Milk Cup in that time. Why milk needs us?
It's extraordinary. Yeah, it's the Milk Marketing Board were pretty aggressive about marketing milk.
Yeah,
I thought this was an isolated thing, and then I realised, of course, there was the milk race.
Yep.
Which was the site, effectively the Tour of Britain nowadays. So the Milk Marketing Board were really big on sponsoring sport and raising the profile of milk, which is just the oddest thing. I mean, I was sort of looking it up, and there weren't that many marketing boards. There was the wool marketing board, so it could have been the Wool Cup. The Egg Marketing Board the Egg Industry Council, which then became the Egg Marketing Board, and the Potato Council as well. So,
wow.
So I think we did all right with Milk Cup. Yeah.
The Potato Cup would have been fantastic, wouldn't it?
I was quite surprised not to see a cheese marketing board. I just assumed that there would be a cheese board. So
it is extraordinary because milk is pretty much the first brand anyone has anything to do with, and it's not brand aware. It's not like people are putting jam in their coffee. It's not for a lack of. Oh, I hadn't really thought. I wondered if this milk. Oxford got on a brilliant run in the Milk Cup that year. In particular, there's a highlight with these 3 games against Man United, and this also sort of takes me, very much back to that era of watching football unfold on Sports Night. Later that night, without any kind of idea of the score or anything, and you're kind of this third division side can't be beating Man United again over 3 games, and they're 3 incredible games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went to the first game, and that was the game that really changed everything for me, because I'd been to the Manor. I was going quite regularly by the point where it all started to happen. But for a long time it was crowds of 3,000 or 4,000, and there was 16,000, 17,000 people in there, which was pretty full. And I mean, when the Manor was eventually closed, I think it was a capacity of 9,000 because of safety stuff. So it was a bit tight in there,
Yeah.
It was like there was banks and banks of people hours before kick. It was that kind of classic, the ground's full at 2 hours before kickoff kind of thing. And Manchester United were, like Liverpool, just one of those clubs that just permeated everything. Kids at school were Liverpool fans. They were Manchester United fans. Maybe Arsenal, Spurs. In the early 80s, there was a bit of that because they did quite well in cup finals. But yeah, Manchester United was a proper football club, and so we drew them at the Manor. And yes, I mean, a lot of the research for the book is, as you might, watching YouTube clips, and a lot of it is Sports Night highlights.
Brilliant.
And it does take you back. It takes you back to things like being allowed to stay up, for example.
Yeah.
But also being allowed to stay up to watch your club was pretty special. And of course, the manager was Ron Atkinson, previous Oxford legend. So yeah, then over a period of 2 to 3 weeks, we go on this epic 3-game journey. I was talking to a friend of mine not so long ago who's read the book, and he said, and younger than me, and he said the thing that struck me was the replays, because it's not that long ago where we did actually have replays, but they ended after 1 replay. Whereas back in the 80s, you just kept playing. There was the FA Cup semi-final around that sort of time, which went to 4 or 5, I think, between Arsenal and Liverpool. But, with the Oxford Manchester United trilogy, it adds to the romance. They were just going to slug it out until somebody won. Because the second replay at the Manor, had that been drawn out, they would have gone to another replay. And it would have just kept going until eventually somebody won. It's just fantastic. I mean, that's how all sports should be. You should just keep playing until somebody wins. And so, or just drops dead,
Yeah.
There's a great detail in the book, which I hadn't realised about, which sort of says a lot about Maxwell, about the choice of where the third game was going to be after the 2 replays.
Yes. So there was a rule which basically said that the second replay would be decided on a coin toss. And Manchester United assumed that Oxford would just cave and say, well, we'll go back to the Old Trafford because we can make a lot of money out of it. Or, at worst, we'll take a neutral venue, which would have been Villa Park. And all Manchester United thought they needed to do was just sort of refuse to engage with the coin toss. Just absurd. And the FA kind of went, oh, no, that's true. It will just have to go to a neutral venue. And Maxwell kind of laid into them and said, no, I don't want a neutral venue. I want a coin toss to decide where we're going. And I think in any other situation, a third division club of that size against Manchester United and the Football League, would have caved in. I mean, the logic was to cave in because of the money. But Maxwell, he wasn't going to get beaten by anybody, so he refused. And there had to be this coin toss to decide where it was going to be. And Maxwell called it right and said, we'll meet you at the Manor. That, for me, is a pivotal point in terms of Maxwell's relationship with the club, because for once, it wasn't all about money. It wasn't all about business. He seemed to just briefly realise that there was something more that he could get out of it.
It's a fairly good United team as well. They didn't win much in the 1980s. They were more of a cup team. But you've got Frank Stapleton, Arnold Muren, Norman Whiteside, Arthur Orbiston, Brian Robson, Remy Moses. There is a significant change in the third and final game, though. And I don't know if you saw this, Scott, when you were doing your research, is that Gary Bailey, who's played in the first 2 games, doesn't play in the third. Jeff Whelans, who only played... I can't even remember him playing for United, but I think he played no more than a handful of games. He comes in for that game. But all said and done, it's a really strong Manchester United team.
Absolutely,
FA Cup holders, current FA Cup holders, I think United are.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And this Oxford United side we are starting to see it be shaped into the side that Jim Smith produces here. Particularly, I mean, obviously you've got the kind of the Briggs and Shotton combination at the back, and wide men are so important both on the wings, but also coming from fullbacks. And Langan and McDonald really seem to come to the fore.
Absolutely. So, I mean, those two. I mean, Bobby McDonald in many ways is a bit of a forgotten character in it because he didn't make it to Wembley in '86. You know, when people think about Oxford's great team, it's the team that appeared at Wembley, but Bobby McDonald didn't get there because of injury. But him and Langan, both of whom were effectively kind of put on the scrap heap by their respective clubs at the time. Bobby McDonald had a big disciplinary issue at Manchester City and was given a free transfer. Dave Langan had been out of the game for the best part of 2 years with a knee injury and was given a free transfer by Birmingham, and Smith picked both of them up. And what it did was that you had so much attacking energy down the wings, because not only did you have those two, but in front of them you had people like George Lawrence, who was this fantastic, rapid, strong, erratic as well. I mean, he was, there'd be times where he was absolutely useless, but then when he was good, he was brilliant. And particularly going down the slope towards the London Road, that was his thing. You know, I have vivid memories of him. My dad used to talk about him. He used to flick the ball over his shoulder and then just go. And just everybody was reeling. And then on the other side was Kevin Brock, who was a local boy. And this is one of the things, you know, we talk about Maxwell's money, but actually, if you look at that team, it's a whole bunch of people who have, in various different ways, fallen out of the game, certainly at the top level. So injury prone, like I say, local boys, non-league players who have come good, like Shotton in particular. But yeah, Brock and George Lawrence absolutely terrorising those wings, and it was all because of the fullbacks having that experience behind them allowed them to sort of develop, and it all starts to click at this point in terms of a team. It feels like a Jim Smith team at this point. This is what he wants. This is the football he wants to play, which is, really attacking, aggressive football. He was never a defensive man, and we paid for it eventually, but it was all about goals. And my God, we scored goals.
Of course, if you mention Kevin Brock and the Milk Cup, it is very difficult to not shudder at the quarter-final.
Yes. Yeah, so that's having beaten Manchester United, we're then drawn against Everton. Everton are on their knees as a club. They've spent a lot of money that season trying to emulate Liverpool and failed miserably, and they're just... So we think we've got them. Basically, we go into this game as a third division club, favourites to go through to the semi-final of the Milk Cup. It's not a great game. We're not as fluid. Everton are rubbish, but we take the lead, and then shortly before the end, Kevin Brock picks up the ball in sort of midfield. He kind of dallies on it a little bit. Peter Reid comes and closes him down. He gets a little bit panicky, but he spots a route back to the goalkeeper, Steve Hardwick. At the time, of course, it was back passes, so just stick it in his hands and he'll just lump it upfield. That's kind of how they did things. So this pathway opens, pathway to safety for Brock. He passes back, and from behind Malcolm Shotton comes Adrian Heath, and basically darts in between, pushes the ball round Hardwick, and was so worried actually that he would be closed down or that he would fall over, just takes a pot shot and puts it into the back of the net, and they equalise. And essentially the magic of that cup run just explodes on the club at that point. It's like the spirit has just gone out of us. I mean, we can go into what happened to Everton, but Everton suddenly, that sliding doors moments, that suddenly changes Everton's fortunes for the next 2 to 2.5 years.
Yeah.
They make the FA Cup final. They make that League Cup final that year, the Milk Cup final that year, the FA Cup final where they win the FA Cup and then go on to win the League and Cup Winners' Cup. All because of Kevin Brock's slightly errant pass. Incredible.
It's sliding doors moment. Exactly. It's a turning. We had Declan, an Everton fan, on talking about the Howard Cat, and he, I wondered whether it's just us who remember Kevin Brock's back pass because we're sort of tormented by it in some way. But no, it's as an Everton fan, it is seismic.
Yeah, I a lot of the detail of that moment, apart from watching it on sort of YouTube, but a lot of the detail about it, when I talk about it in the book, comes from Everton forums, because they still talk about it on Everton forums about the the goal that Adrian Heath scored and Kevin Brock's back pass.
It doesn't put Oxford off their primary mission. They get promoted. We get into the 84-85 season. To repeat the trick is quite something. There's a sort of a crest of a wave that they're riding at this point, aren't they?
Absolutely. So they've got a momentum that perhaps the fans weren't aware of. Jim Smith himself was a little bit kind of sceptical about whether they could take the step up. I mean, maybe he was just protecting himself a little bit. Maxwell, absolutely. He thought we were just going to sail through the divisions, and why would that be why would it be any other way? But yeah, then we go into the next season. The first game of the season is away at Huddersfield, and we win 3-0, and it's kind of like, blimey, this is easier than I thought it was going to be. There were several key parts to this. I mean, I talked about Dave Langan. Dave Langan signed during that summer, but the real key to all of this is the signings of John Aldridge just towards the end of the previous season. From Newport, and Billy Hamilton from Burnley during the summer. So we had this new strike force, and what a strike force, the greatest strike force that the club's ever had. Classic, goal poacher and battering ram. I mean, that was the sort of dream back in the 80s. That was what every club was after, was these two kind of contrasting strikers. So then those two start to find a rhythm together. You've got the wingers that we talked about earlier, getting the balls in the box. When you've got getting the balls in the box, and you've got players like that to get on the end of it, then you're scoring goals, lots of goals. And we're absolutely flying that season. And then the Milk Cup comes around again, and we're off again.
Yeah.
Which at the time I thought that's just what happened. I thought we'll just beat the biggest clubs in the country. It's because I used to read. I read Roy of the Rovers when I was a kid, and all of the Roy of the Rovers stories are always exactly that story arc. Humble background. Then they end up winning the FA Cup. And we were doing exactly that. We were on that trajectory, and I thought, that's just what clubs do. Every club does it. That's very normal. I mean, mad now.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. You get Arsenal coming to town, and you kind of expect to win the game. It's really which they do.
Yeah, well, I mean, Arsenal top of the league at the time. We were top of Division 2. Yeah, so Arsenal take the lead with a Graham Ricks daisy cutter.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so he mishits it and it just rolls through a crowd of players, and then Steve Hardwick just lets it into the back of the net. And we think, I guess you're thinking at that point, go, oh well, we had a good run. It was fun while it lasted. And then John Aldridge heads in the equaliser. Pat Jennings in the Arsenal goal poleaxes him, knocks him out basically. I mean, he would have been sent off nowadays. It's a really vicious challenge. He just piles into him. So the ball goes in the back of the net, and Aldridge is just unconscious on the floor, and he gets carted off out on a stretcher. Jim Smith is readying Peter Rhodes-Brown, who's a very much an Oxford legend, and still at the club today, not as a player, but so Peter Rhodes-Brown's getting ready to go on. Jim Smith says, hang on a minute, we'll let Ken Fish, who was the physio at the time, just kind of see what we can do with Aldridge. During this time, 10 men against the league leaders, and Billy Hamilton scores with a header, 2-1. The place goes ballistic. And while that's happening, John Aldridge reappears magically from the tunnel. Again, nowadays it would have been, it would have been 2 weeks of, whatever it's, head injury protocols. No, we need to be careful. You've literally been out cold.
He's back on.
Yeah, just stick him back on. It'd be fine. Yeah. So, and then it's just a big slugfest at that point. Arsenal equalise, and then in the second half, Dave Langan, famous for Oxford fans, picks the ball up in the middle of the Arsenal half, and Pat Jennings had injured his hand in the game previously, which Jim Smith had picked up on, and basically said, just shoot at him, see what happens. And Dave Langan lashes this ball from miles away. I mean, it's 35 yards easily, and it looks like it's Jennings to just pluck it out of the sky. And he just fluffs it, and it just ball drops into the net. And that's the winner. And it's a very famous goal for Oxford fans. 35 yards. People talk about it being a screamer, but Jennings should have saved it. I mean, she really, really should have done. But yeah, another famous scalp,
Now, had the result gone the other way, you could imagine, a frustrated child being really upset about that defeat and writing to a Saturday night TV show to have the game replayed. But Arsenal, I always felt, there are many things to pick apart, obviously, on this, not at least, obviously don't want to dwell too much on the programme and Jimmy Savile, but it does make for quite a surreal bit of television footage seeing that game replayed as a child's fantasy.
So the background to it is that there's an Arsenal fan who's so peeved by this result, he writes to Jimmy Savile, who does a programme called Jim Will Fix It, which basically kind of fulfills people's wishes. And what he wanted to do was to overturn the result. So Jimmy Savile fixes it for the game to be replayed. The first team players of both teams come back to the Manor, and this kid referees it and basically sends off the entire Oxford team, allowing Arsenal to win 6-0 or something. But again, can you imagine a Premier League side, Premier League leaders? This is like Liverpool today.
Mm.
The first team, Salah and people coming on their day off to muck about for the benefit of some goofy TV show.
It is super bizarre. Of all of the 1980s references that we have on this podcast that we do, and there are plenty, I never thought we would be referencing Jim Will Fix It.
I sort of wondered whether I'd made it up. I was quite when you referenced it in the book again. I was thinking, no, this did happen. This did happen, didn't it? Because I was slightly wary of searching Jim Will Fix It.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah.
So extraordinarily, and this one's really a close run thing. But this Oxford side, which get promoted and actually go up as champions, I think. Well, Jamie, you can maybe correct me on this or whatever. I think at the time when Oxford were the only team to win successive titles or something like this.
No, I don't think so. Ipswich won what was Tier 2 in the 1960s, then went on and won Tier 1, I think. I'm pretty sure Forest did this in the 70s as well. I think they won.
Oh, okay. So, yes. So it might be... Maybe it's lower league. Maybe we're the only ones to win lower league titles in a row.
It was something like that. Titles, or maybe it was third to second to first, which was unique. But there was something unique about that sequence because we won both titles, obviously, which is unusual.
And teams were sort of going through. It wasn't quite so unusual to get those successive promotions because you had Swansea had done it and a couple of others, I guess.
Well, I mean, generally football was more equal than it is nowadays. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't easy, but it was easier. But also the bigger teams were weak. Towards the top of Division 2 at the time was Manchester City, Birmingham City. But essentially, it was generally a slightly weaker. It was a more balanced football environment, or fairer, I suppose, ultimately. And then you get teams, Watford boosted by Elton John, Oxford boosted by Robert Maxwell. Not in the same way that they get kind of juiced nowadays. We didn't spend huge amounts of money. And Watford didn't spend huge amounts of money either. I mean, they were just stable.
Yeah, Bristol City around about the same time as well. So Swansea and Bristol City are both charged through the divisions into the top league and then almost fall out of it as quickly as they're in it as well. It's quite a strange story. But yeah, football definitely was a bit more equal. I mean, in the season that Oxford won Division 2, Tier 2 and got promoted, just to kind of demonstrate how football was kind of equal, Tottenham Hotspurs came third in Tier 1. So, I mean, anyone in the top three.
Anything could happen.
Yeah.
Weird.
So, Oxford achieve the seemingly impossible. So, they get promoted into the top tier. And that is after joining the league in 1962.
62.
Yes. Yep. Jamie, has anyone done it? Anyone done it faster?
Yeah, Oxford United are part of a special group. So there are 5 teams that have gone from the non-leagues under the election or automatic promotion process from the non-leagues to the top tier. So Oxford, it was 23 years, 1962 in the league and 85 promotion. Before that, Ipswich had done it, 38 to 85. Wigan, 27 years. In 1978, they were elected to the Football League and they were in the Premier League in 2005. Now there are 2 teams. Luton Town recently, who were a league team, then a non-league team, and then became a league team again. 9 years, which is incredible. And it looks like they're going down to the non-league again, incredibly. But there is one incredible story, and that's Wimbledon. Wimbledon got promoted to the Football League in 1977. By 1986, they were in the top division. 1980, I think it was, they won the, was it 87 actually? They're all 86, 88. I can't remember which one it was. They won the FA Cup. But their rise is extraordinary. But Oxford United are part of a very special group with Luton, Wimbledon, Wigan and Ipswich. Only 5 teams that have been elected or promoted into the Football League and have actually gone on to play in the top tier.
But Oxford are of all of those, well, not all of those clubs, many of those clubs, we did it with panache. Watford, Route 1, Wimbledon, Route 1. I mean, it's all Route 1 ugly stuff. We did it with style. That's the difference. So
I think Wimbledon may argue they did it with a certain type of style.
Yeah. A special kind of beauty. Yeah,
certainly so. Yeah.
So we should get on to the top tier and the Milk Cup success, which we're going to do in the second half. But Jamie, I think you have a little teaser for us.
Well, I got a question for both of you, and I'm pretty confident you're going to get it right. But I'm still going to do it just to prove that you will. We talked about replays. Oxford United, Manchester United in the League Cup. 2 replays, 3 games. The most replays ever. And replays is a weird thing, really. It's only in football where replays is a feature. I mean, it does happen in other sports, but it's a rarity. In football, sadly now, replays are becoming a forgotten thing and probably will be a forgotten thing as we go forward. But Alf Church versus Oxford City played in the FA Cup in 1971. They had 5 replays. They played 6 games and they played at St Andrews, Villa Park and the Manor Ground twice in those 6 games in order to decide a victor, which was Alf Church. Now, there was one individual that covered all 6 games. My question to you guys is, who was that individual?
We'll have a moment to think and we'll tell you after the break.
Hi, Graham here. We're just about wrapping up our plans for this current season, but we're already turning our attentions to our next season. If you've been listening, if there are some teams you would like us to cover or would even like to come on and talk about those teams, you can contact us, drop us a line. How do they get hold of us, Jamie?
Well, they can get hold of us by using the social media accounts, X or Blue Sky, where we have the same handles. We've got yourself at Said and Dunn and myself, Couch Pundito. So Couch Pundito at Blue Sky and Said and Dunn at Blue Sky or on the X, aka Twitter equivalent.
And you can also get hold of us on Insta, which I think the kids call it these days. What's our handle on that one?
Yes, we're on Instagram where we're trying to share some of our little videos. So please give us a like, a follow, and keep in touch with our little videos. So we are on Instagram as the Greatest Team Football Podcast, or by far the Greatest Team Football Podcast. Search for either of those and you'll find us. Please follow.
Yes, so welcome back. Jamie, you left us with a little quiz, a question there as to who had covered, crucial word, covered the 6 games, Alf Church v Oxford City. Scott, any thoughts?
Well, the obvious one for me, but this will almost mean nothing to anybody outside of Oxford, would be Nick Harris, who is a broadcasting legend at Oxford. That would be the person, but I suspect it's not them.
Yeah, I wonder, could it be, I don't know where Jim Rosenthal came from. I wonder if it's Jim Rosenthal?
Graham, well played. Yes. Nick Harris is a good shout, Scott. Yeah, it's Jim Rosenthal. He was working for the Oxford Mail at the time, and he was quoted in a couple of his reports was City's saga heads into infinity, which is fantastic. He also has, which is this quote from another one of his reports, and I said it like Jim Rosenthal in my head because I can hear him on the television. It was one heck of a saga. I can hear him saying that. It's just bizarre how he's kind of ingrained into my social and cultural psyche. The great Jim Rosenthal, who, to no surprise, you two, is an Oxford United fan.
So everything seems fantastically well set. Oxford have been promoted; they are in the top tier, but all is not quite. Nothing goes quite according to because the man who got us there. Oh, sorry, sorry. I've allowed my impartiality. Of course, I have no interest, no skin in the game. The man who gets Oxford there, Jim Smith, on the eve of this moment, walks out. So, I mean, well why did he go?
Well, one word ultimately was money. So he went to negotiate a new contract, which was pretty normal, and he goes to Maxwell House, the offices of the Maxwell Empire, to negotiate. And it's all very friendly at this stage. This is, I believe, something like the 27th of May, 1985, which is very significant because they decide what they're going to do is that they'll negotiate this while watching the European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus at the Heysel Stadium in Belgium. They haven't really got very far, and Maxwell's secretary comes and says, you might want to see what's happening on the TV. And so they break off their negotiations, their very cordial discussions, and go to see the sort of slow, tragic unravelling of the Heysel Stadium disaster. You know, it's another one of those kind of big moments that changes football's sort of direction of travel. And then it's all over about £5,000. So I think Jim Smith wanted £50,000 and Maxwell wanted to give him £45,000. That was his salary for the year. So the initial negotiations break down just on the basis of the Heysel Stadium disaster, and they go their separate ways. At which point, QPR step in and say, "We need a manager." To Jim Smith, "We need a manager, and we'll give you 50 grand. We'll give you what you want." And of course, one of the things that it was tricky to unearth because there's not a lot of evidence of it. But you know, working with Maxwell was difficult. So I think it was, although it was over money, I think it was building up. The relationship between Maxwell and Smith was pretty intense and difficult over quite a long period of time. And yeah, so he walks out. He walks out just as we're preparing to join the greatest show on earth. You know, the top flight of English football.
And the man who steps in and the man he turns to is football's most reluctant manager, and a man last seen with his head in the hands at plans for the Thames Valley Royals. It is our man, Maurice Evans.
Yeah, so Evans is a broken man. So it's essentially what happened was, obviously he'd been dragged through the whole Thames Valley Royals thing at Reading, and then shortly after, Roger Smee then became the owner of Reading. He basically fired Maurice Evans, and Maurice Evans has had enough of football. Backbiting, greed, none of that. He hates it all. And so he was ready to walk away from football completely, turned down a lot of managers' jobs. And then Jim Smith brought him in as a youth development officer. So he was kind of in the back office, really, at the club. And when Smith stood down, Maxwell turned to Evans. And Evans didn't want the job, just absolutely did not want the job because of this experience he's had with clubs, just basically club owners and football generally just being this kind of really unpleasant environment. So he just did not want the job, but he took it on an interim, well, because he thought the players deserved that. They deserve some degree of continuity to get them going in the first division, having achieved everything they've achieved. So he takes it on. So he's not actually manager, he's just temporary manager at that stage. But the polar opposite to Jim Smith in terms of character. Jim Smith's outgoing, bubbly, aggressive. Maurice Evans, quiet, studious. And if you follow Jim Smith's career, he was always at his best when he had a good assistant manager, because you had the person who's going to do the technical stuff, and Jim Smith didn't do the technical stuff. And Maurice Evans was doing the technical stuff. He was the one who was discovering the players. He was the one that was advising and was a sounding board for Jim Smith and that sort of thing.
The season sort of starts pretty well. It's sort of okay, but it seems to me that there are kind of two kind of turning points. One is signing Houghton, and the other is that Aldridge starts scoring.
Yeah, so Ray Houghton nearly signed for QPR. with Jim Smith, and in fact, I believe even kind of trained with the QPR squad before the season started, and it was quite a long pursuit. Houghton was he wasn't particularly a star, he was tenacious. He's clearly a good player, but he wasn't a big name signing particularly. But we pursued him and eventually signed him, and he didn't start until September. So the first month we didn't play with Houghton. And John Aldridge struggled at first. He got sent off in pre-season and kind of had a bit of a fitful start to the season and didn't really get going until a little bit into the season. Then he started scoring goals. And the funny thing about Aldridge is that he does come over as being a super confident character, but I don't think he was a particularly confident character. I think he's actually doubted himself quite a lot. He certainly doubted himself when he went to Liverpool. He just did not think he was a big enough, good enough player to go to Liverpool. And I think he may have gone through a bit of a crisis of confidence early in that season. And then suddenly it starts coming naturally. And then at that point, the goals are flowing.
Yeah, he's incredible. I mean, he does really well for Oxford United in the Tier 2, the second division, as it was called, in the promotion-winning season. I think he notches 34 goals in that season, which is a big haul. And, just listen to you guys talking about how he struggled to get started. He ends up with 31 goals, I think, in total, 23 in the league. And he's up there with Gary Lineker, competing for the top goal scorer. And I mean, he's consistent. If you look at his record, even at Liverpool, he has a brilliant season where I think he scores his best league total, which is 26. But even when he went to Sociedad, he scored goals. And at the end of his career at Tranmere.
The other thing that's probably happening, or it's probably worth mentioning, is the Manor ground itself. So playing at the Manor, which ironically, Robert Maxwell spent his entire time trying to get out of, get them away from. But the ground has been super important throughout the run, but I think the top division in 1986, it wasn't full of fantastic stadiums, but they were all better than the Manor ground, probably.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, they were bigger for one thing, but it was such a jarring experience for clubs coming to the Manor, and particularly night games where it was very enclosed and very claustrophobic. And then a very famous slope that, which the players nowadays, the players who played there said genuinely you could feel it. Running down the slope was genuinely, kind of like running down the side of a hill. It was. I can't say when I was there. I can't say I really noticed it. I mean, we attacked the London Road with vigour, no doubt. I didn't realise quite that they were almost being kind of propelled by gravity, down towards the home end, But there was this sort of, it was all of these kind of components of, it was weird. It's a weird stadium. It had like 6 different stands, and it was surrounded by trees. Even when they upgraded, they did quite a lot of upgrading during the closed season in 85, 86. But it was still rubbish, it was still really ugly, and corrugated iron everywhere, and it just destabilised clubs or teams that came to the Manor, and we just found a way to use it to our advantage. So it, became a 12th man really. But you sort of, as a fan, it almost creates magic because it's doing something that contributes to the overall success of the club by just existing. And the weird thing is, both before and after, thinking about the Manor before and after that period, it was a bit tumbled down and a bit rubbish, and it wasn't always like that. But for that period of time, it was just a really, really special place, and it just seemed to be kind of possessed by something. It was amazing.
I was lucky enough to go there once in the 1980s, and I have to say my abiding memory of going to the Manor ground is being wet. As an away fan, that's the only thing I can remember about my experience, is just being super cold and super wet because it rained the whole 90 minutes. And as an away fan, you were exposed to those harsh elements.
Yeah, Cuckoo Lane End, there was absolutely no shelter at all.
No.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
But you're absolutely right about those cup nights and that feeling, and it goes back to those ties against Man United, against Arsenal, that kind of the night games in particular. I think you could sort of feel that in the home game against Aston Villa in the semi-final when Les Phillips scores. It's very evident in that game against Everton, with a vital game to keep Oxford up, and Phillips scores again. Pulling the away form together, there starts to settle or sort of get a degree of comfort in the league. It's not guaranteed by survival, it's not guaranteed by any margin, but they are progressing their way through the Milk Cup and amazingly reach Wembley for the first time, where narrative, Claxton, who should they? As all the teams that they should play it in the final, who should it be? Well, it's Jim Smith in QPR.
But only just, because Jim Smith actually had an altercation against Chelsea a couple of weeks prior to that, and was up on an FA charge and was on the verge of being basically banned from the touchline. And he was actually eventually banned. He was banned from the touchline, but they allowed it to start after the final. But yeah. So I mean, like you say, narrative everywhere. It's like it was pre-written, really, to face Jim Smith. So that this really weird situation where Jim Smith knew the opposition players better than he knew his own players. There was only one player, Ray Houghton, that he hadn't signed. And also he had tried to sign Ray Houghton as well. So he knew Oxford inside out.
You talked about players and their stories. This is Trevor Hebbard's redemption, isn't it?
Yeah, so in 1979, while he was at Southampton, he had played in every round of the League Cup, their League Cup run to the final. But about a month before the final, they'd had some poor league form, and Laurie McMenemy dropped Hebbard, and they went on a very good league run. And McMenemy just decided that he was going to stick with the team that was winning in the league for the League Cup final against Nottingham Forest. And Trevor Hebbard, having played in every round and laid on the goal that got them through to the final, the semi-final, it didn't even make the bench. Of course, at the time, there was only one substitute, so there wasn't a lot of space on the bench. And so, he that was him. That was him done. And I mean, he slipped to the margins at Southampton. Jim Smith picked him up for Oxford, and this is his moment.
My sort of memory of it is not an awful lot happens for the first half an hour until Trevor Hebbard scores, and once he scores, he just then. I don't think Oxford really look in trouble throughout the rest of the final.
It didn't feel like that, I have to say. It felt,
yes.
It felt like we were in trouble all the time, even when we were 3-0 up with 2 minutes to go. But it didn't help. It'd been really wet in the morning and the pitch cut up. And they had this charity game beforehand with David Frost and Jimmy Tarbuck.
Jimmy Tarbuck, of course, yes.
Yeah. Those guys get to every final, don't they? In the 80s, they're just getting their band together every time there's a cup final.
Well, if you get the opportunity, you'd take it, wouldn't you? But it did mean that the pitch was completely cut up, even within 5 minutes of the kickoff. So it didn't make for a pretty game. And it really was calling out for somebody to grab hold of it. And Hebbard was never a confident player. He had all the ability, but he never grabbed games by the scruff of the neck in the way that maybe Houghton did or whatever. Yeah, and then 5 minutes before half-time, he suddenly finds himself completely clear, out-sprinting the QPR defence, looming in on Paul Barron in the QPR goal. And I remember this like it was yesterday, this eternity of him lining himself up to shoot. And just people around me going, shoot. Why don't you just shoot? That's all you have to do. Shoot. And that felt like it went on for days and days and days. And I remember it. It's like imprinted on my brain. And then he unleashes at the near post. QPR are generally kind of like completely outsourced. Well, QPR are outsourced full stop. But they're outsourced, they're pulled out of position and they are all over the place. And Paul Barron has made a miscalculation. He's a step too far to the left and there's a little gap. And Hebbard finds it and sticks it in the net. And for me, there's these moments of silence, moments of disbelief. And there was this moment of disbelief, like, that ball's actually gone in the net there. We're at Wembley. That was the moment for me where it moved on from the Roy of the Rovers story where this happened to everybody to, my God, this is actually happening to us. Because also, I've never seen whatever it was, 35,000 Oxford fans.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have 35,000 people in the ground. So it was the biggest kind of collection of Oxford fans. And suddenly they're all going ballistic.
It is the thing of beauty. Hebbard steps up and set Houghton up gloriously. They both hold the nerve, take it to 2-up, and then Aldridge doesn't get his goal. It's Jeremy Charles follows up towards the end for a 3-0. But it's, as you say, it's just extraordinary that this club that was nowhere near the Football League 25 years before have silverware in this tournament that keeps that Malcolm Shotton is going to get to meet the director of the Milk Marketing Board. This this great moment.
Yeah, absolute pinnacle of his career. And he looks up and there he is, the marketing director of the Milk Marketing Board with the trophy. And he gets a big kiss from Robert Maxwell as well. I mean, it just gets better and better, doesn't it?
There is this unbelievable moment, which says a lot about Maurice Evans, a man who obviously sort of shuns the limelight at the best of times. But he makes this ultimate gesture, doesn't he, when he sends Ken Fish up to collect his medal instead of him.
Yeah, so Ken Fish is physio, but was everything else. He was the groundsman, he was the coach driver, he was a babysitter. Him and his wife used to babysit for the players' children to allow the players to go out. He was the club, and he'd been there for donkey's years. He'd been there since the 60s. But Maurice Evans knows this, and Evans, it gets caught on camera, actually, him saying to him, "You go and get the medal." Because Maurice Evans felt like an imposter in all of this, all the way through. It's Jim Smith's team. Ken Fish is the true spirit of the club. So he turns to Ken Fish. He couldn't send Jim Smith up, could he? So he's turns to Ken Fish and sends Ken Fish up. So Ken Fish and Jim Smith go up together. Narrative everywhere. It's just a beautiful moment. It is a genuinely beautiful moment. It's in all of that time. It's the one opportunity for Maurice Evans to go and take glory and that kind of thing, and he just hands it over to somebody who most people would just have no idea who he is. I mean, you talk about true football men. Maurice Evans was a true football man.
I don't know if you guys realise this, but 3-0, that's the highest winning margin in a League Cup final at that point when the game is played at Wembley in a single match. The earlier finals in the League Cup, I think the first 5 or 6 all were played over 2 legs. But once it gets to Wembley, that's the biggest winning margin. And it stays that way all the way till 2005, 2006, I think, when Manchester United beat Wigan 4-0. So it's a big margin. And most importantly, you're now level with major honours with Swindon Town.
That was always the goal.
Yeah. And crucially, we won it during the milk period, so that counts slightly more.
They won it during the Horse of the Year period.
Yeah. Horse of the Year cut up their pitch, and Jimmy Tarbuck cut up ours. So again, we win.
So, having gone from this unbelievable high, Oxford have the difficult job of trying to stay up. So there's a crucial game against Arsenal. I think it happens after the season kind of finishes. So they know that if they win...
Yeah, so the game that would have happened that weekend of the Milk Cup final would have been the game against Arsenal. So that gets postponed. But there's no time in the schedule because it's really late. It's the 20th of April is the Milk Cup final, which is right at the end of the season. And there is just no time to squeeze in the Arsenal game. So it gets kind of, everybody finishes their season on the Saturday, and this final game of the season, this last game of all First Division football that season against Arsenal at the Manor, in which it's win or bust in terms of staying up.
They somehow patch up Billy Hamilton. I don't quite know how Billy Hamilton could could possibly have played at this stage.
Yeah,
but he somehow gets on the pitch, doesn't he?
Well, absolutely. So by this point, I mean, we were absolutely battered. I mean, there was Gary Briggs played with a fractured cheekbone. John Truick was injured and didn't play at all. Jeremy Charles, who was Hamilton's replacement, had also got injured. And Hamilton was desperate to play in the 86 World Cup in Mexico. So he dragged himself off the treatment table in order to play. And yeah, thank goodness he did, because he was one of the goal scorers. Arsenal were on the beach. I mean, stick to the narrative. Arsenal at home, and we sweep them away 3-0. But Arsenal, their minds aren't, their hearts aren't in it, and their minds aren't in it either. So but scratch that. This is a glorious finish to the season, and we stay up. Yeah,
that is, I suppose, the high point. The following season's a bit of a funny one. You've got a few things, haven't you? Because you know, at this point, it's obvious that Robert Maxwell's interest in Oxford is waning, and also you can't have someone like John Aldridge scoring all these goals without people noticing. And right from the start, there's this narrative of Ian Rush moving to Juventus, but that funny kind of loan period back, and Liverpool know they're going to replace. And Aldridge, I don't even know if Aldridge did look that much like Ian Rush, but there's a suggestion.
Both had moustaches, didn't they? That was about as far as it went, I think. But there definitely was a kind of feeling of identikit strikers. So it was an obvious switch. But it was obvious because he scored a lot of goals. He was, and they, like you say, they had a year. Liverpool had a year to replace Rush because he was off to Juventus, and because there was limits to the number of international players they could have at Juventus, and so they were waiting for a couple of players to retire. I think Platini was about to retire, so there was a year to replace him, and Aldridge was the obvious candidate to replace Rush. And so that kind of saga just went on and on and on, and eventually came to a head around Christmas time of '86, where finally they put a bid in, and after some rough and tumble with Maxwell, eventually...
Yeah, I love this detail in the book, which is Aldridge eventually has to kind of not submit it's not actually a transfer request, it's kind of leaks the story in one of the papers, but he leaks it to the wrong paper.
So there's a pretty notorious week, in as much as Oxford beat Manchester United, Alex Ferguson's first game, quite famously. We then get knocked out of the Milk Cup by West Ham in the last minute with a very controversial goal, and then we play QPR, where after the QPR game, having conceded a last-minute goal at Loftus Road, Maurice Evans leaves without a bunch of the Oxford players, of which Aldridge is one. And Aldridge goes to the paper and basically is misquoted as saying that it's a small town club and, tin pot club, basically, and that he's putting in a transfer request. Maxwell's incandescent and calls him, but he's angry because he didn't give an exclusive to the Mirror. He gave it to the Sun, which is again back to this Murdoch Maxwell thing going on. He wasn't that bothered about the story about the transfer request. He was more bothered that he didn't get the exclusive.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for a turning point of that whole Oxford story, the moment Maurice Evans instructs the team bus to leave without the players, or some of the players, does feel like a moment maybe things have kind of turned too much, probably.
Well, I think there's, it's an early kind of version of player power. Aldridge had market value, and Maurice Evans, it was a misstep. I mean, he apologised to the players on the Monday, but Aldridge basically used his muscle because he had value in the market. And it was a sort of fundamental shift in the story, Oxford's story, and the balance of the squad and all of that kind of stuff. It was inevitable at some point that there would be a bit of a fallout. But yeah, that's definitely the beginning of the end of that period.
There's an argument that, though slightly weirdly, because Oxford do quite well in replacing Aldridge. Dean Saunders comes in, hits the ground running, and does remarkably well. His goals keep Oxford up that season gloriously in a late game against Luton. But I think arguably the bit they really struggle to replace is Hamilton, isn't it? That seems to be a bigger problem. And the guy they hope is going to replace him is the fantastic Billy Whitehurst.
Yeah. So Maurice Evans he just seemed to slowly but surely evolve the club into almost wanting to turn them into a kind of Route 1 in the Watford mould. Perhaps that was where the inspiration came from. So we became a more robust side, and there's no more robust player than Billy Whitehurst. Unfortunately, robust, but not necessarily a great player. His off the field antics more famous than his on the field antics. Let's put it that way.
I think he had more impact on the Oxford Magistrates Court than he did on the Manor Ground at the time.
Well, when I did the research, you kind of put in the name, and almost all of it is done for speeding, done for drink driving, done for brawling in a pub. It's like when did he play a game? But there's no references to him playing games of football. It's all in and out of court and being arrested or having charges dropped against him and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. It's a remarkable character, terrifying as well, I think.
Yeah. Graham, you shared the story about Billy Whitehurst previously about when was it Neil Ruddock is. You tell the story because I can't remember.
Neil Ruddock was doing. It obviously would have been one of those kind of DVDs back in the day of football's hardest 20 players, and I think he has him at. If he doesn't have him at number 1, he has him at number 2. He has Billy Whitehurst, and he just tells this story of he's playing against them. Maybe is it Newcastle at this stage? Either Billy Whitehurst isn't playing. He's not even playing. But Billy Whitehurst, they send Billy Whitehurst over to have a word with him at half-time in his suit. And he said that he's never been more scared of anyone.
Well, apparently Alan Hansen says in the opening to his autobiography is that at the beginning of the season, during that period, he'd looked to see when Oxford were coming because of Billy White, because he was scared of Billy Whitehurst and basically getting nailed by him. Plus, of course, we had Briggs and Shotton, who were pretty robust themselves. So, we were a pretty aggressive side back then, on and off the pitch.
Yeah, by our last season in that division, by which time, and probably the final nail in the coffin is losing Houghton, who follows Aldridge to Liverpool. By that stage, we seem to be having players sent off most weeks.
Yeah, and in between the sendings off, half of them are getting convicted for drink driving. I mean, discipline has just collapsed at the club. There's other things going on in football at the time because Liverpool, in particular, that season, Liverpool invested in, Houghton and Aldridge already, but also John Barnes.
Beardsley as well, wasn't it?
Beardsley, that's right, yeah. I mean, they were really spending big money, probably about £3 million, but big money for the time. And a lot of other clubs were starting to spend relatively big sums. So Oxford were picking up scraps by that point because, as you said earlier, Maxwell had sort of lost a lot of interest. And so we were picking up players that had history. And it really started to show towards the end of the 87-88 season, where all just basically discipline fell apart. I mean, it was always quite a heavy drinking side. It was quite famously, they were a bit of a gang that they would go drinking in the Britannia, which is a pub opposite the Manor, and then down into the city itself. But yeah, I mean, by 88, it was carnage.
I of course blame most of it on the kit that we had that season, which was quite spectacular.
Yeah,
and a 25th anniversary celebration as well. So it was a special one. So we decided, in our infinite wisdom, to have a striped shirt which was white and yellow, but like 2 or 3 different shades of yellow.
Yeah, it was definitely 25 shades of yellow.
Yeah, just. That whole period there was a real change in kits in terms of the way that kits were manufactured. So you could do more things with them. you know, in terms of like more patterns and things. And yeah, we just threw every pattern at it. It's like they'd kind of just pressed their computer and said, yeah, just all of the patterns, please. You know, all of the yellows and all of the stripes. And, you know, and it just, what came out was this extraordinary monstrosity.
Ironically, no longer the Milk Cup. I think it's Littlewoods by this stage. There is one final cup run, including another famous, glorious victory against Man United. I think you would call it, it's not really a towering header, an old-fashioned diving header from Gary Briggs, which kind of lives long in the memory.
Yeah, it's like an exocet. He's sort of this, from nowhere, this sort of big lump of concrete in a yellow shirt comes flying between the two Man United centre-backs and connects with the ball. And it's a diving header from about 20 yards out. I think he's slightly outside of the box when he makes connection. And it goes straight in the net. And so, a famous, almost a final hurrah. It's kind of a beautiful ending in many ways, because it's obviously, there's an echo back to those 3 games, whatever it was, 4 years earlier. But yeah, one last moment of magic. And just the sort of spirit draining out of the club by that point. You know, we'd overstayed our welcome perhaps in the top division.
Do the numbers suggest we had overstayed our welcome by that stage?
Yeah, sadly so. So the win percentage going into the top tier when you won the championship in 84-85 was almost 60%. In the first season in the top tier, not too bad, 24%, then 26%. The relegation season, win percentage is down to 15%, and you're averaging 1 goal per game as well, for 2 goals against, which is the complete opposite to what it was in 84-85 when Oxford United won the Division 2 League Championship. It's trending in the wrong direction.
Yeah, big time, yeah. But you can only, a club like Oxford can only hold it together for a short while, you know, that you're stuck in the manor, you've got an owner who will fund you for a certain amount of time before they get bored. All of these things will eventually come home to roost. And by 88, it was all starting to unravel. And amazingly, it got worse, much worse. But yeah, no, it was a pretty bleak last season in the First Division.
Yes, we couldn't imagine quite how much worse it would get. Yeah. But it's all better now, so let's just let's kind of live in the moment. Excellent. Well, we should rank this side, shouldn't we? As a reminder, we have 5 categories of greatness. All-time greats at the top, true greats, then touch greatness, our middle category, edge of greatness, our penultimate category, and then blinkered greats. And our mission here, Scott, is to move Oxford up from the blinkered greats assessment. I don't even know how that got pulled through, but did. So, Jamie, where are you going to take us with this?
Well, I think you've already given an insight of where you're going with this when you try to list the categories, because you kept saying straight over, unless you're just like subconsciously trying to like make me feel it. I mean, so South Coast Jamie, one of our regular guests, who's brilliant, in our Christmas special decided to do a 10-minute spell on Oxford United, and we all agreed unanimously that they were blinkered greats. We know that there's more to this story, and there's more to this story than just winning the Milk Cup as well. It's 3 seasons in the top tier, which for a team like Oxford, with the greatest respect, I think is fantastic. They're in a small club. There's only 5 or 6 teams that have spent less time in the top tier than Oxford United. I think Reading also spent 3 seasons there. So there's that kind of, that synergy between you two. You just kind of have that love in. I think there's easily a case to say this is a touch of greatness, tier 3, because there are absolute touches. The big games against Manchester United, winning the Milk Cup. But I think I feel bad for Jamie on this one, but I think I'm not going to go touch, because I'm going to see where you guys take this, and I have an idea. So I'm going to kick us off in the 4th tier, edge of greatness, because I think it is the edge. It's the League Cup. You've gone into the top tier. 3 very testing seasons in the top tier. So I'm going to start us with edge of greatness, and I feel there may be some movement away from tier 4.
Scott, what would you reckon?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but this would be my argument this is football's bleakest time. Everything about football at that time is bad. Financially, it's bad. There's hooliganism on the terraces. There's battles over super leagues. There's a TV blackout. Football is in an absolute mess during this period. And there's this one little bright spark of hope just for a very short period that just gets us from the sort of the 60s and 70s kind of, the George Bests and the Chelsea, glamorous Chelsea sides into the Premier League and all the glitz and glamour. There's one club that kind of carries football from those two great periods in football, and incredibly, it's Oxford United. So I think it deserves a very special place in football history.
I love it. That definitely is. And you only have to look at the legacy of that team. Aldridge, Houghton, Saunders all go on to great things beyond. The character of Maurice Evans' finest moment, for all what Maxwell brings to them, they managed to achieve this sort of despite Maxwell. There's still a wholesome story in amongst this. I'm definitely convinced by Scott. I'm not convinced by you, Jamie. I think they have to be. They have to be touch of greats, don't they? They have to be in that mid-tier category with, an allowance that we could move them up for true greats in the promotion and relegation special later in the year. I'm going to say Oxford United's 1980s milkman, touch of greats. Scott, thank you. That's been fantastic. We didn't even talk about Sean Reck.
How do we not do that? Maybe I'll come back and do another episode. We'll do Sean Reck.
Yeah.
So Sean Reck, when there's one player who, rightly or wrongly, there's one moment which sort of sums up the downfall of the team, and I think it was in the year we went down. I mean, he probably played for a couple of seasons for us. We certainly weren't very good at that point, and there's a moment I always remember where, another game we're losing haplessly, and our keeper goes to take a big drop kick out, and Sean Reck hasn't turned round yet to look at where the ball just hits him on the back of the head. That's the bit that for me. This isn't gonna. Our season's not changing.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Booked in his first 8 games for the club, Sean Reck.
It's unbelievable.
Eight games. He was booked in every
Wow. 8 games. That's incredible. That's got to be the record, surely.
I would have thought so. It's got to be up there, isn't it? Yeah.
I did a bit of research on this because Graham tipped me off that he got booked quite a lot, and there's not that much precise data for consecutive yellow cards. It's quite sparse actually in terms of trying to find the right data, especially in the lower leagues. But there is one player I found that had 7 consecutive yellow cards, and I thought that was the record, and that's quite predictable. He played for QPR in 2014-15, and he was notoriously known for getting yellow and red cards.
Was Joey Barton about then?
Graham, he gets it all the time. He's so good.
Very good.
Yeah, Joey Barton, 7 consecutive red cards, but 8. I mean, that's special. That's special.
Yeah, absolutely. That was his major contribution, as well as Sean Reck's, as well as getting hit on the back of the head from a goal kick. Yeah, extraordinary stuff.
There is one thing I don't know if you guys are conscious of, considering we talked about coming from election from the Football League all the way through to the top tier. They're on the edge of going into a very unique club, because if Oxford United could, by some way, get from the Championship into the Premier League, they would be the only football team in English history that's come from the non-leagues to the top tier, that's gone out of the Football League, that's gone back to the top tier. Now, you're on the edge of that at the moment. That would be a very unique club to belong to, something to boast and playground about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're carving out our very own special kind of history. There's no doubt about that.
It's definitely niche. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. Remind us what the book's called again.
It's The Glory Years, which covers everything from the appointment of Jim Smith's predecessor, Ian Greaves, right through to that relegation that we've just been talking about. So, it covers an 8-year period. Hopefully an enjoyable read.
Oh,
I've loved talking about it. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's been brilliant having you on. Thank you so much. Jamie, thank you as ever. Thank you for putting up with Oxford United in stereo.
No, I've really enjoyed it. Scott, thank you so much. You are by far the best Oxford United fan we've ever had on this thing.
You've had that lined up throughout the whole thing, haven't you?
So yes, next week we will be back with the Kilmarnock Scottish title winning side of 65.